Maliki. Well, as some of you know, I spent a lot of time working right behind here. And I just want to use that prerogative to thank the CWAP unit for protecting us this morning. These gentlemen out here, you don't know what the CWAP unit is, the Catholic Worker and Other Civilians Protective Unit. It's been set up to protect those of us who exercise our First Amendment rights. So, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for protecting us. These drones, you know, the weapons are not only fired from the air, but they can be fired from a booth such as you see behind there. So these fellows are being very, very courageous in standing between us and that possible assassination technique. So thanks. There are lots of thoughts that go through my mind here. We're on Dolly Madison Boulevard. Now, as most of you remember, Dolly was James Madison's wife. And who is James Madison? He and George Mason were the drafters of our Constitution. What many of us probably don't remember is that George Mason, who lived just about 7 miles down this way, refused to sign the Constitution. He went to Madison and he said, Jim, I'm sorry to tell you this at this point. It was all drafted, all ready to be approved. He said, Jim, I can't sign this thing. And Madison, come on, George, you drafted most of it. What's going on? He said, Jim, it doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and so I cannot, in good conscience, sign the Constitution that you and I drafted. And Madison said, well, that's a hell of a thing. Tell you what, you just keep quiet about this, George, and I promise you that in 3 years, we'll get those 10 First Amendments that you want in the Constitution in. Now, in those days, when people make promises, they were people of honor. And so George Mason could say, all right, Jim, what's the deal? I'll keep my mouth shut. You guys get the Constitution passed, but you promised. And for the next 4 years, up and down the eastern seaboard, rode people on horses to the various legislatures. They got the 10 Amendments passed, all right? Now, what does that mean? Well, yesterday, this fellow, John Brennan, I know him. He was a failed analyst when he started out here, when I was doing my work here. He chose to swear himself in, or get sworn in, on a document that was touted to have extreme symbolic significance. It was a draft of the Constitution, a draft, all right? And it was had notes by George Washington, and that's what he picked to swear himself in. Okay. Now, people are saying there was a very symbolic significance to that. Well, either they don't know their history or they do. I don't know which is worse, but they must have realized that that draft of the Constitution did not have the first 10 amendments. Okay? I don't know which is worse, that they realized that that was the case and did it deliberately, or were completely oblivious to it. So, John Brennan, who now heads up this outfit, has not sworn on a Constitution that includes the 10 Amendments, the Bill of Rights. Well, what does that mean? Well, we exercise our First Amendment rights here today. We are protesting against the illegal, unmerciful, immoral killing of civilians by drones. And the Fifth Amendment is the one that's really applicable here. Who remembers the Fifth Amendment? Those with some gray in their hair probably remember the Fifth Amendment as that cowardly thing that suspected communists used to use to avoid incriminating themselves. Oh, you remember that? Okay. Now, it turns out the Fifth Amendment's a pretty good idea, as most of Madison and Mason's ideas were. It says no one, I'll repeat. It says, quote, no person, okay? It doesn't say no citizen. It doesn't say no people living here in the United States. It doesn't say no Americans. It says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
Yes.
Okay?
What about grand juries then?
All right. Now, what do these guys say? What did Brennan say? And what does the chief law enforcement officer of our government, Eric Holder, say? Well, like the punk from New Jersey he is, like the punk from the Bronx that Holder is, they say, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry, forget about it. We do process right here. We do. Yeah, don't worry about it. We do process right here in the White House. Now give me a break. There are 3 branches of our government last time I read my civics book, and the judiciary has always been involved in due process. You can't do due process without judiciary. Now the fact that they're a bunch of cowards, and the fact that a bunch of people in Congress are a bunch of cowards, well, that's where we come in, folks. That's where we come in, because we're going to make a difference here. We're going to make Obama live up to what some of us believe still that he really, really believes, and make him do things that he might not feel empowered to do, that he might be afraid to do. Now, I was reviewing some of the things that Brennan said, and you might want to all listen in here. On the 5th of December 2005, right after he quit the agency, he was asked on Lehrer, on the NewsHour, Margaret Warner. She says, now, Mr. Brennan, what about this rendition thing? What is rendition? And Brennan, in his typically eloquent way, said, well, rendition is the process or procedure for moving people from one place to another. And she said, oh, well, why would you want to do that? Well, we need to move some people to places where they know how to interrogate people better than we do. And someone objected. Oh, she said, well, does that mean we're letting other countries do our dirty work? Is that what rendition is all about? And he says, well, I've never heard such arrogance to think that we know better how to interrogate people than other countries that have been at it for much longer. Oh, give me a break. Okay, that's what he said. That's rendition. That's torture. And here he is, right in the thick of it. I guess I would just mention that I've spent a lot of time in Europe and especially in Germany. And when I heard George Bush get up on the 6th of September 2006, before I mention what he said at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I want to mention some good news, okay? I was an Army intelligence officer, and so I take a little bit of pride in the discipline that we learned. And our chief, General John Kimmons, who was head of Army intelligence in 2006, heard that George Bush was going to get up in the White House in the afternoon and extol the virtues of enhanced interrogation techniques, or what he called an alternative set of interrogation procedures, and what the Senate Intelligence Committee calls what? EITs, that's what they are. They never, talk about euphemisms. They're EITs now, enhanced interrogation techniques, okay? Now, the morning before General Kimmons knew George Bush was going to get up to defend this, or to explain that's what we're doing, Kimmons said he's going to have his own press conference at the White House, okay? And he did, right across the river. And what did he say? He said, and I quote, "No good intelligence has ever come from abusive intelligence techniques. History shows that, and the empirical evidence of the last 5 years, comma, hard years, comma, also shows that, period," end quote. 5 years, 2006 minus 5, 2001. He'd been through it. He'd seen this stuff. He'd seen what it done to the discipline of our profession as U.S. Army intelligence officers. So that's kind of a backstory, but it's very important, because if you say, who are you going to believe, or people come up to you and say, well, who am I to believe about torture? Does it work or not? Well, you have a choice between General Kimmons, who spent his career as an intelligence officer, particularly on interrogation, or you can believe George W. Bush. So last thing I want to say is this, that when I heard Bush and the others talk about enhanced interrogation techniques, now we're not allowed to say that anymore, we're supposed to say EITs, right? EITs, CAPs, whatever. EITs, enhanced interrogation techniques. It rang a bell in my mind. You know why? Because I knew a little bit about German history. Verschärfte Vernehmung. Vernehmung is interrogation. Verschärfte is more sharp. In other words, enhanced interrogation. Verschärfte Vernehmung is right out of the Gestapo playbook. Do not blanch before that revelation. It's a direct translation, folks, a direct translation. Which brings me to the German experience, and I'll just, I have this favorite book here. It's called Defying Hitler. It's written by a young lawyer who was in Berlin at the time when things really started to go bad in 1933. I've singled out just a couple sentences here. So he's observing these things from the academy that he's studying. He's studying to be a German judge, okay? He's already a lawyer. And he's writing his diary. And on page 104, he says, you know, I'm really disturbed. I'm watching what's going on here, and, quote, there are few things as odd as the calm, superior indifference with which I and those like me watched the beginnings of the Nazi Revolution in Germany, as if from a box at the theater.